I want you to spend as much time as possible with Jackie, so I'll turn over to her right away. Thank you so much. Jackie, come.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to meet you and so glad to be able to share my story with you. Actually, you know, every survivor's story is different. And my story is focused around what we call in the museum upstanders. You know, there were victims, perpetrators, rescuers, and bystanders. And I'm talking about the rescuer, or as we sometimes call them, the upstanders. So let me start by giving you a very short background. My mother was born in Germany, and my father was born in France, in Alsace, which has gone back and forth between Germany and France. For example, in 1870, the French lost a war, so that part of the country went to Germany. In 1918, the Germans lost the Second World War, and so therefore that part went back to France. And what I didn't realize for a very long time, that both my grandfathers, the German one and the French one, had both fought for Germany in the First World War, which, you know, took me a long time for that to get through my head. Anyways, my mother was always a very brave woman, and when Hitler came to power in 1933, she left. And first she went to Strasbourg, which is a place in Alsace, and then somebody told her that to go to Paris, she could be a nanny for a family. And so she went to Paris and became a nanny. And because she didn't have a formal education or professional education, she always emphasized to my sister and I that we needed to have something that we could do for ourselves, regardless of what happened in the rest of the country. That was quite unusual in those days, the early 50s. But she insisted that we must have, you know, some kind of occupation that we could do, because she said you never know what's going to happen. Anyway, she met my father in Paris in 1936, and they got married, and I was born in 1937. And at that time, you know, there was a big depression in the United States, and also there was a big depression in Europe. And my French grandfather, who owned a couple of butcher shops, went bankrupt, and he had to move anyways because he was Jewish, and they had to move. And so he moved to Gex, which was at that time a very small town near the French Alps. And my parents joined him there. We were all quite poor. I didn't have a carriage, a baby carriage, until I was 1 year old when my uncle bought me one, or a crib, I should say. And I slept in the bassinet, which, you know, got a little small, you know. Anyways, this war started in Europe in September of 1939. And of course, my father, being a French citizen, was drafted. And it was called the Phony War. By June of 1940, the French had lost. And so my father was demobilized in the so-called unoccupied zone, and we were in the so-called occupied zone. Now, the unoccupied zone was run by a puppet government, the Vichy government, and basically they did what the Germans told them until the Germans took over in 1942 altogether. Anyways, we were in the occupied zone, And I still remember, I was, I don't know, 4 or 5. I still remember that the headquarters of the Germans was across the street from our apartment, and I used to see the sentries walking back and forth in front. Well, my mother, you know, couldn't travel because she was Jewish. You couldn't get the papers to travel. So my first instance of an upstander or a rescuer, let's say, was a man called Monsieur Fournier. And Monsieur Fournier was a hunter, and he knew the backwoods, he knew the mountains. He said to my mother, Therese, that was my mother's name, I will take you through the mountains, we'll walk until we get to a place where you can take your star off and get on a train and rejoin your husband. I have to tell you that at that time, my mother and both my grandparents had to wear the yellow star, but I didn't because I was under 6, and apparently under 6 you couldn't wear them. So Monsieur Fournier, who had a family and with 2 children, at great risk to himself, walked with my mother from 6 in the morning until at night. And I think my mother's feet were very swollen. They didn't have sneakers then, so I don't know what kind of shoes she was wearing, but I imagine it was pretty bad. And they walked all day until they got to a place where my mother could take her star off and get on a train. Now, while they were walking, they saw a German soldier, 1 or 2, and my mother, who was always a quick thinker, she was wearing like a suit jacket, and she turned it over, and they didn't stop. You know, the Germans didn't stop them, so that was very fortunate. So my mother got on the train, went to rejoin my father. I'm going to add that from the time I was 2 till the time I was 5, I saw my father once. We had to go to a place where there was a gate and sentries, and we could talk across the gate. So in the meantime, I stayed with my grandparents. My grandparents didn't want me to leave because they said, well, we have lots of food. Nobody's going to hurt us. They just couldn't believe that anybody would want to hurt them. I don't know. You know, first of all, it was isolated, and there was really not the communications that we have now. And if there was a radio, it was controlled at that time. So I don't know whether they knew anything or not. Anyways, Monsieur Fournier, let me go back a little. My mother remembered during the First World War, she had gone to her grandparents for 4 years, and she loved her grandparents. She was very upset when after 4 years of living with them, she had to go back to her mother, because her mother was a very strict taskmaster and was not a very affectionate person. I can vouch for that personally. So she said, no, Jacqueline has to come with us. So Monsieur Fournier, again, our first upstander or rescuer, said that he would pretend I was his daughter, and I was going to he was going to take me on the train to a prearranged spot where they would meet my mom, and then she would take me to rejoin my father. The family would be reunited. My grandparents were very much against it. They said, oh, here we have plenty to eat, and there you don't know what you're going to eat, you don't know what. But my mother, as I said before, was stubborn. So Monsieur Fournier took me on the train, and if I was asked any question, I was to say that my name was Josiane Fournier, not Jacqueline Ash. Now, you know, I was only 5, so if anybody asked me, I don't know how long I could have maintained this false identity, but that's what I was taught. Well, we were again fortunate, and we took the train, went to a prearranged spot where my mother took me and took me back to rejoin the family. My grandparents were correct. In one thing, we didn't have a lot of food. Now, I don't remember being hungry, but my mother tells me that sometimes told me that sometimes she would get a potato, she would eat the peel and give me the inside of the potato. And we did all kinds of things. My father brought a rabbit home, and I thought it was a pet, but it wasn't a pet. And they killed it, and I couldn't eat it. And once my father got a lot of cabbages, and we made sauerkraut out of it, and I had to walk around. It was like a half barrel, walk around with my bare feet, I guess to start the fermentation. Hopefully my feet were clean. And stuff like that, you know, which I really didn't realize at the time how often my parents went hungry. The third upstander is a gentleman who was a manager of a viscose, which was a rayon thread. That was before the days of Orline and other synthetic fibers. And he knew my father was Jewish, but he kept him at work. And so therefore, my father had a job all through the war. So that was another thing. And we also had a little garden. We lived in factory housing. We didn't have hot running water. We didn't have a bathtub. But you know, when you don't have those things, you don't miss them. It's only when you get them that you miss them, if you lose them. Anyways, there was I don't know the word, there was a group of the resistance, French resistance in the factory, and my father tried very hard to join them. They were, of course, suspicious because he had come from out of town. They didn't really know him, but after a while, they let him join in 1943. And what they did basically was sabotage and things like that. It's a good thing that I didn't stay with my grandparents, because my grandparents were arrested by the French police on February 22nd, 1944, and they were taken to a transit camp called Drancy, which is a little north of Paris. They stayed there for 3 weeks, and on March 7th, they were loaded on a train, and they arrived at Auschwitz in March 10th, where I believe they were immediately murdered, because my grandfather was 70, my grandmother was 66. To give you an idea of how many people were killed, that convoy, which is a whole set of cars, had 1,100 people in it. And out of those 1,100 people, only 34 came back. There were 10 women and 24 men that came back. All the rest were murdered. So, of course, as a young child, without a twin, where people were kept sometimes to do what they called scientific experiments, scientific experiments, I'm sure I would have been gone, so it was a good thing. By the way, Monsieur Fournier, I said it was right near Switzerland, and Switzerland was neutral. It was maybe 3 or 4 miles through the Swiss border. And Monsieur Fournier again said to my grandparents that he would take them to Switzerland, and they apparently refused. He didn't. We don't know why. We don't have any. The only thing we ever heard from them was a note that they were able to write, and it said, "My dear ones," this is my grandfather, "this evening we were arrested by the French police, and tomorrow at 7:30 they will take us to Dijon. Don't worry yourself. If God wills it, they will not lock us up." I mean, they weren't even thinking of death. They will not lock us up. And he said, you know, love and kisses. And my grandmother says, don't worry yourself. Everything will arrange itself for the best. And also love and kisses. And that was it. We never heard from them again. And after the war, my father and his brothers went to Jacques, tried to find out who was responsible, but nobody was responsible, of course. Nobody said anything. And they went into the apartment, and the apartment hadn't been looted or anything. It was just as they had left it. Their breakfast dishes were in the sink and everything. And in fact, I have a ring, I don't know if you can see it, that I wear, which is my grandmother's ring, and I believe that's when they found it, because that's where they found it, because they certainly didn't have it beforehand. Anyway, so back to us. So my father, as I said, my father finally got to join the resistance. And, you know, on June the 6th, 1944 was D-Day. And at home, I have the poem that the British Broadcasting Corporation sent, which was in a code, so that the resistance would know when they were landing. And so then the men, and there were some women, I know a woman who became my aunt, used to hide guns under her mattress, decided to go into the mountains to fight more openly. And as it happens, my sister was born on June the 12th, and of course my mother couldn't go to a hospital, not because we were so primitive. We weren't primitive at all. I was born in a hospital, but she couldn't go in a hospital in the big town next to us because she would not have come out. She would not, neither she or her sister, or my sister, would have come out. And so therefore the our friends, women friends, assisted at the birth, which was at home. And my father, I still remember, came down about 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks later. He was in camouflage. He had that black stuff under his eyes, and he looked at my sister. My sister looked like she had jaundice, but of course there was nothing we could do about it. She was all kind of yellow and very skinny, because it was not a good time, and my mother didn't have very good nutrition. Anyways, what happened was a few weeks later, they thought it was too dangerous for the wives and children to stay where we were. So we went up into the mountains, and I remember that we walked, and it was so steep. My mother was pushing the baby carriage, and this older gentleman who was in the resistance had his cane hooked around the rung of the carriage, and he was pulling and she was pushing, and that's when we were bombed. you know, the Germans hadn't been there because it was isolated. I mean, there was nothing there for them, really. It was, I guess, farm country. And that's when we got bombed. I still remember that. We were eating soup in bowls, and there were a couple of families in the house. And first the soup bowls went out, the soup bowls went down, the table went up and went down, and nothing got broken. But we ran out of the house. And the house next door was just a big hole. And I was so frightened, but so frightened that I couldn't walk. When it was time to go back home, I slid. I mean, I just couldn't, my legs wouldn't support me. I was that frightened. And so, and then the Germans landed, and they separated us, and they asked questions. And they said, "Where's your father?" And I said, "Oh," he said, "Grenoble." Grenoble was the big city. He's working in Grenoble. Somebody must have told me to say that. I was 7.5 by that time. Somebody must have told me to say that. I don't remember if anybody told me. I just remember saying it. One of the lasting things that happened to me was because of my experiences as a child. I have a very hard time sometimes answering very innocent questions like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And somehow I always feel like it's dangerous to answer, even though I might just be going to the store tomorrow. Not always. I mean, I've gotten over some of it, but I still, sometimes I don't say anything, or I say I'm not doing anything or something like that, even though I plan to go shopping. And it really, I feel it's due to this experience that you mustn't tell anybody anything about yourself, and you must, you know, keep quiet. That's the only thing I can think about it, that, you know, you can't ever say that you're Jewish and so forth. It was very dangerous. Anyways, the Germans landed, as I said, and asked questions. And I don't think there was a Gestapo or anything. It was just young guys, because this was the end of the war, and they were already in retreat. And because, you know, it was like early fall, it was still warm, of 1944, and they were already in retreat because the Allies had landed and so forth. So they really didn't push us. Anyways, the way, and I don't know how we managed this, but the way we got back home, is that we drove out of there on a German truck loaded with duffel bags. My sister in her carriage, my mother and I, we must have made quite a sight. And then they dropped us off someplace where we were supposed to catch a trolley to go home. And well, while we were there standing waiting, we got strafed by one of these small planes with the machine guns. And again, we were very, very fortunate that nobody got hurt. We went back home. In the meantime, my German grandmother and her 3 sons had managed to go to the United States in the late 30s. I believe my grandmother took the last ship out of Genoa, Italy. And so my mother wanted to rejoin her family, and that's how we came to the United States. And they lived in Chicago, so that's where we went. We went to Chicago, and I was 10, and of course didn't know at all a bit of English. I didn't know how to read, French. And what happened is this was before the days of English as a second language or anything. So, and I was the only foreign kid in that school. So the only thing they did with me was they put me in first grade. And you can imagine how humiliating that was to be in first grade when you're 10. It was terribly humiliating. I was very upset. And then over the summer, we got here in April, and over the summer I had a wonderful teacher. Her name was Mrs. Sable, who took an interest in me, and every day I used to go to her house, almost every day, and she would give me books to read. And by September, I knew English so well that I would put in 6th grade. And by 8th grade, I was literary editor of a school paper. So, you know, just goes to show you. But I did not have a happy childhood. People made fun of me. And I don't blame them. Kids do that, you know. But I hope one of the lessons we try to teach is, you know, not to be a bully. Sometimes you say things and it's thoughtless and you don't, but you just do it, you know, and that's what happened. For example, even though I knew English very well, there were some words I couldn't pronounce. And I would say, I'm going to the beach, and it didn't come out that way. And nobody would tell me what they thought I said. Those were words you didn't use in those years. Now they're used all the time, but don't forget this was like the late 40s. You didn't use those kind of words. And they would say, oh, look what Jackie said. Look what Jackie said. And I had no idea what I said. I thought I said I was going to the beach. Said she said a bad word, but they wouldn't tell me what it was, you know. And so it was not a happy thing. And I think, you know, most immigrants, maybe all immigrants, when they come and they have to accustom themselves to a different culture. It's not easy. It's not easy. And of course, both my parents had to work. My mother had all kinds of jobs. My father, actually, one good thing, you know, in Europe at that time, I don't think it holds now, but if your father was a butcher, you became a butcher. I come from a long line of butchers, by the way. And my father really wanted to be an architect, but he became a butcher, I guess, to help his father. And it stood him in good stead because when he came here, at least he had a trade that he could do. My mother, as I said, didn't have a trade. She had all kinds of menial work. And that's why she always impressed upon my sister and myself, you know, to really get our education, and that's one of the things that both of us did. I'm sure I forgot a few things, but I'd love to hear questions or comments.
Well, thank you first. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We greatly appreciate that. One question I would like to start out with, if it's okay. We are currently reading Elie Wiesel's memoir, Night. And one of the themes that we're discussing is trying to find the light in the darkness. So I was wondering if you had to tell these students one thing that they could learn from studying the Holocaust, what would it be?
Oh dear, that's a tough question you're asking me. Well, unfortunately, we always say never again, but there are, I won't say Holocaust, there have been many genocides that have happened. Unfortunately, people don't seem to learn from the past. And you know, those who don't who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. And that's one of the things that personally is really saddens me, and one of the reasons that I come and try to tell people. But the other thing is, there are good people everywhere. So I was fortunate enough that I had several good people who had, by the way, great risk to themselves and to their families. I mean, it wasn't simply telling a teacher that so-and-so was bullying so-and-so. It was really a life. It really determined sometimes whether they would live or die. Now, for example, Monsieur Fournier, who really helped our family a lot. All the people, there were about 5 families in the factory that helped us. One of the things I forgot to say was that they must have infiltrated the German headquarters, because we always found out when they were coming to pick us up. The German headquarters were not in our little village. And we always found when they were coming to pick us up, somebody told us. I mean, like one night I remember we slept in the bushes. I don't remember all the instances. One night we went to a neighbor's house. I don't really know how many times this happened. And, you know, there are good people on the earth, and that's why I tried to focus my talk on those people who helped us. And I think if you talk to, I'm not going to say all of the survivors, but many of the survivors, you'll find that they had some kind of help. Like, for example, my cousin, I have a cousin who's 2 years older than me. Her mother worked always. She was, her nanny, she had a nanny, and her nanny took her to a village, to her village. For 4 years, she was with her nanny, who pretended that she was a relative of some kind. And that's how she was saved. And the other thing is, that's very strange, my aunt, her mother, who worked as a laborer because there were Germans in the factory, apparently one of the German soldiers liked her. And he said to her one day, "Don't come to work tomorrow." And she didn't go to work tomorrow, the next day. And that's when all the Jews were arrested. So, you know, there are not enough good people, but there were a lot. Okay, so that's what I keep focused on.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that can inspire our students to be courageous to do the right thing. Hopefully that will inspire our students to always do the right thing and be courageous.
Yes, I hope so.
Great. All right, I'm going to take questions now from the students. Does anyone have a question? Okay, you'll have to come up to the computer so she can hear you.
Yes, I'm not very good. I have bad hearing. Hello?
So, I just wanted to ask, how did it feel when you found out that the war had ended?
That what? The war had ended? I was very happy. But you know, at 7½, you're not really aware. I mean, I knew there was a good thing, but I wasn't really that aware of everything. I remember when the American soldiers came, and everybody that I knew was going to get food, and I thought, well, all my friends are going, so I wanted to go, and my father said, no, we don't do that. That's not the right thing to do. But I snuck out of the house. How I snuck out of the house, don't ask, but I remember sneaking out of the house because I wanted to go where they went. You know, but I don't think I had any, at that age, you don't really see the big picture. You see what's happening to you, what's happening to your family, but you don't really have a concept of a big picture. You know what I mean? I was 7½, so. Anybody else?
Anyone else have a question? All right, Peyton's gonna come up now.
Yes?
Did your father fight the resistance from 1944 to 1945?
Well, I think 1943.
That's awesome. He's a
That's
big
when he
history
was
buff.
accepted. That's when he was accepted in the group. You have to be accepted in the group first. And they were very suspicious. He wasn't from that area. And so, you know, until they knew they could trust him, they didn't accept him. You know, because if they had been found out, they would all have been killed. So it's, yeah.
Did Mr. Fournier survive?
Did Mr. Fournier what?
Survive.
Oh, yes. Actually, I found a picture of him. My parents went back to France in 1971, and they must have visited. They never told me this, okay? But when my mother passed away, and I was going through her stuff, I saw a picture of them. I really didn't remember them at that. I mean, I remembered their names and what he had done, but I didn't remember what they looked like. So I don't know what happened to their kids. And as I said, my parents didn't say anything. So he survived. I suppose he's dead now because he would be very old. My father was born in 1908. My mother was born in 1911. So, you know, my mother would be like 106 or 7. So, you know, nobody. Monsieur Fournier certainly is not alive, but they did see him in 71. They took a picture of him and his wife. I don't know what happened to the kids. Josiane was my best friend when I was about 5. Josiane Fournier, you know, the one that I had to take I had to take her name. Yeah. But you know, after you leave, you know, people a lot of time ask, well, do you get, you know, did you get in contact with me? I'll tell you the truth. After you leave and you're trying to make a life in a new country, that's what you're focused on. You know, you're not focused on that. It's very hard to acculturate oneself, and you become focused, like my parents became focused on making a living and just getting through day by day. And so you often don't think of the people, or if you think of them, it's fondly, but you don't necessarily get in touch with people. Yeah. Anybody else?
One more.
One more.
Do you think about it on a day-to-day basis? Like, how does it affect your daily life?
Well, it affected me in the sense that I said I'm quite a private person. I don't like to, this is probably as good as I get, I don't like to talk a lot about my private thoughts or feelings. I have learned to talk about them, but even now I don't. In other words, you know, a lot of my friends will tell you all kinds of things, and I just listen, but I don't necessarily reciprocate. For a very, very long time, when somebody would ask me, when people asked me here what I was, I thought they were asking me about my nationality, not about my religion. So I would say, I'm French. What they were really asking me was about the religion, but I didn't know that. So I always said, I'm French. You know, religion was a private affair. It was nobody's business. That's all. But that's just I mean, that's what my father would have said too. I mean, that's just a cultural thing.
Well, we know that you are an inspiration to all of us, and thank you for taking the time and the courage to express and share your story with our students, and we greatly appreciate it. And the kids are going to do one last wave goodbye before they get back to class. Thank you so much for
Nice talking to you.
It was wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much.